If you clicked on this video because of the title, I promise you this is not clickbait.
Grazie.
If you've ever thought to yourself, why do Americans only seem to speak one language?
What ain't no country I ever heard of? They speak English and what?
Well, the answer to that question is actually a lot more interesting and academic than you might think.
Then at least speak English.
So, let's check it out. When we take a look around the globe, as a whole, somewhere between 50 to 75% of the entire population of Earth is at least bilingual, meaning they speak at least two, but possibly more languages. But to be fair, this is actually a pretty hard metric to track in full because there are still communities and languages that haven't been really fully studied. Also, we do tend to have a little bit of difficulty discerning between what is just simply understanding a second language versus speaking it fluently. Plus, although learning additional languages is a deliberate choice for many people, there are many countries where learning an additional language is expected or even necessary. Papua New Guinea, for example, uses over 840 languages. Of course, not every person speaks all of those languages, but it is common for people to be multilingual as par for the course. And also interestingly is that a person who speaks a certain language, such as Ukrainian, may also have an understanding of a similar language, such as Russian. So although they don't speak the same language, they can, to some degree, access materials written in Russian.
That's in Russian. Okay, you speak Russian.
But I don't read it.
And last but not least, there are plenty of places around the globe where you'll not only just experience a language, but multiple dialects of that language. I mean, speaking personally, I speak Hochdeutsch, but I've also heard and read Plattdeutsch and Frisian, and to be quite honest, you're gonna have a hard time convincing me that these are the same language because, I mean, that looks like something else entirely. Nonetheless, there are about 7,000 languages that are spoken in the world. Of these, around 50 are considered global languages, meaning that they're spoken from a global perspective. The remaining languages have limited scope that can be categorized as regional, national, or ethnic.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It
Gets the people going.
But here's what I, as an American, find wildly interesting. Although as Americans, we tend to have the international reputation for not speaking or even really being all that welcoming to other people who speak foreign languages, technically speaking, the United States doesn't actually have a national language, at least at the federal level. Not even English. Over the years, many people have tried to declare English as the official language of the United States.
This is a country where we speak English, not Spanish.
However, the US has arguably only gotten more linguistically diverse over the years. Several other languages, notably Creoles and sign languages, have developed in the US. Approximately 430 languages are spoken or signed by the population, of which 177 are considered indigenous to the area. But once more, the federal government allows Americans to speak any language they want, and this is a right that's protected in our Constitution. Many scholars assert that an English-only law would violate due process and equal protection under the law. But that being said, the US Constitution does allow for states to declare official languages, and 31 states have in fact declared English as their official language. But Alaska, Hawaii, and South Dakota also have indigenous languages declared as official languages. In fact, Alaska has more than 20 official languages. And speaking of all of those languages, let's take a quick look at foreign language proficiency in the United States. The number of people in the US who spoke a language other than English at home nearly tripled from 23.1 million, about 1 in 10 in 1980, to 67.8 million, almost 1 in 5 in 2019, according to a recent US Census Bureau report. At the same time, the number of people who spoke only English also increased, growing approximately by a quarter from 187.2 million in 1980 to 241 million in 2019. So how exactly can Americans be becoming more bilingual, but also more monolingual at the same time? Well, interestingly, this data is actually skewed pretty heavily by an ever-increasing Hispanic American population. Just shy of 20% of the US population is Hispanic, of which about 50% are bilingual. So it's not so surprising then that Spanish was the most common non-English language spoken in US homes, about 62% in 2019, 12 times greater than the next 4 most common languages. And when you crunch the numbers, that means that only about 13% of non-Hispanic Americans speak a second language. And that number is actually pretty low when we take a look at other countries abroad. Take where I live now as an example. Here in Germany, 67% are bilingual, and 27% can speak at least 2 foreign languages. And the story of Germany's bilingualism is actually quite nuanced. More than 20% of people living in Germany come from another culture, including families just like ours. Many are multilingual. They speak not only their language of origin, but 1 or more other languages as well. And many people who come to live in Germany learn German as a foreign or second language. Additional linguistic heterogeneity stems from long-established ethnic minorities, like the Danish, Frisian, or Sorbian populations, and increased foreign language teaching and education. Among the German-speaking population between 18 and 64, more than 20% spoke more than 1 language in their childhood homes, according to a 2020 study. But back to the United States just briefly, I actually do think it's pretty interesting because while the numbers might not be quite as high as here in Europe, bilingualism is on the rise in the United States. And there's actually a pretty cool couple of reasons for this beyond just immigration and migration reasons. Other reasons which may account for the rise in bilingualism is the relearning of some older immigration languages, as well as of Native American languages and American Sign Language. And to these should be added the effort that's being made to allow children and adolescents to both acquire and use a second language in the home, as well as more natural learning opportunities in some schools with immersion and dual language programs.
Hallo zusammen, wir hoffen, dass Ihnen dieses Video gefällt. You know, it's been a while since we've given you a language learning update of our German speaking skills, and given the topic of today's video, now is the perfect time. I've shared before that learning German has admittedly not always been a linear path for me. When I first moved abroad, I thought that my stay was only temporary and didn't exactly invest the time, energy, and expense into my language learning. But May marks my 10 years of living here in Germany, so learning to speak, write, and read in German has gone from a nice to have to ein wichtiger Teil des Lebens. But with full-time jobs and a toddler in tow, traditional language classes weren't a good fit for Ashton and I's busy lifestyles, but we still craved the individual attention and personalized feedback that we got from the instruction from a native level speaker. But then we discovered the Lingoda Language Sprint Challenge, and it completely changed the way that we learn German. If you haven't heard about them before, Lingoda is an online language school that connects students across the world with native level teachers in live classes to learn a language. Currently, they offer classes to learn English, business English, Spanish, French, or German. Lingoda hosts one-on-one or group learning sessions on Zoom for a range of abilities from beginner to advanced. But their language sprint is really where we saw an explosion in our German comprehension skills. The language sprint is an intensive language course where you are challenged to consistently take language classes for 2 months straight. If you attend all of their classes, Lingoda will give you up to 100% cash back. Seriously, more than 50,000 people have participated in previous Lingoda sprints, and they loved it because this learning method showed results in a short period of time. So if you want to give it a try, use the code FAMILY20 or click the link down below in the description of this video to get 20 euros or $25 off of the first payment. Warum also nicht bei uns mitmachen? Probierst du Lingoda noch heute aus?
Now, before we jump into the issues that surround the integration of foreign languages in the United States, I think it's probably best that we address first the elephant in the room. And that's the fact that being bilingual in the United States as a technical definition means something very different than what it actually means here in Germany, and that's all thanks to the US Census Bureau. The best metric we have for tracking bilingualism in the US comes from this organization, which specifically measures the number of Americans who speak a language other than English at home as part of their yearly American Community Survey. Ultimately, that metric is what gave us that 20% number I mentioned in the previous section. But countries like here in Germany would consider somebody to be bilingual if they learn a second language, not necessarily if they speak that second language at home. And so let me put that into perspective here. Even though the official language of Germany's national government is Standard German, and German is spoken by 95% of the people who live in Germany, and German is the most commonly spoken native tongue in the entire European Union, we still know that Germans have a relatively high proportion of bilingualism. Plus, it's interesting to note that the best studies we have on bilingualism in Germany come from academic sources and not necessarily a federal census, which hasn't tracked such data comprehensively outside of some labor studies since the late 1930s. The moral of this story is that if the United States was to track bilingualism under the same definition that we use here in Germany, well, the rate of bilingualism in the United States would actually be a lot higher, and vice versa. If Germany decided to only say that someone was bilingual by tracking what language they spoke at home, well, the numbers for Germany would be a heck of a lot lower too. The first major issue that the US faces when encouraging skills like bilingualism is due to our geography. In short, we're a big, gigantic landmass where you can likely live a long life and travel a great distance without ever needing knowledge of a foreign language to function. But not all states are created equal when it comes to multilingualism. In southwestern states such as California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas, and the eastern states of Florida, New Jersey, and New York, at least 30% of people 5 years and over spoke languages other than English. But in other states, like Mississippi, Montana, and West Virginia, less than 5% of the population spoke a non-English language. And yeah, this is somewhat unsurprising from a geographic standpoint, because the states with the highest levels of multilingualism are either states that border Mexico, our Spanish-speaking neighbor, or are typical major points of immigration, such as the case of Florida, New York, and New Jersey. But I want to take a minute to take a look at one specific example. The state of Florida is particularly notable in that it experienced a 26% growth of bilingualism between 2010 and 2019 by adding about 1.3 million people who spoke a language other than English after starting with a large population of this group, 4.9 million in 2010. But what makes Florida particularly interesting is that from a linguistic standpoint, there are areas of this state where English is actually the minority language. In Miami-Dade County, for example, characterized by large Hispanic communities, Spanish seems to be the primary language. Several businesses have signage in Spanish. And English-speaking Caribbean migrants contend daily with customers and staff in supermarkets, small stores, large department stores, and professional offices who speak little or poor English. In fact, workers in Miami-Dade County often find that one of the requirements to get a job is being bilingual, usually in English and Spanish.
Nosotros queremos ir con ustedes.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Oh, you speak English?
No, just that first speech.
You're kidding, right?
¿Qué?
But counties like Miami-Dade are quite frankly the exception and not the rule. You're gonna find that for the large majority of the United States, speaking a foreign language is a pretty rare exception. But if you live in Germany, for instance, here we're surrounded by other countries that speak different languages. And in our pocket of Germany, there are vast regions where the neighboring country has not only influenced part of our culture, But because borders have been fluid over time, there are parts of our region which were once France and parts of modern France which were once German. I mean, here in Freiburg, we even have a German-French high school that students can attend, and unsurprisingly, there are far more French as a second language speakers here in our area than in other regions of Germany. But again, America really isn't like this because we really only have one international border that is with a country that speaks a different foreign language, in this case, Mexico and Spanish. Unless, of course, you do want to consider the province of Quebec in Canada, which there they speak French, but in Canada, English is also one of their official languages. But the US, again, is vast, creating the illusion that Americans never really have to learn a foreign language, because many feel there's no point because they'll probably never use it anyway.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
But you know, beyond geography and the heritage of spoken language, the root problem starts in timing and quality of foreign language instruction in the United States. Although there are some schools in some pockets of our country that will offer a foreign language sooner, the vast majority of Americans don't actually learn a foreign language until around the age of 12 to 14, which studies have shown is far too late if fluency is the end goal. Studies have shown that learning a second language should start before the age of 10, and immersion in a different country with that language would yield significantly better results. In fact, according to one study, immersion is said to be even more important than starting early. And this point connects to quality, as the student would spend their entire day learning and having to practice in an environment that wouldn't allow them to revert to their first language. So the amount of time spent practicing in this situation far exceeds the time given in public school. And at least in my experience in public school in the United States, I was only asked to take a foreign language if I eventually wanted to go on to university. And in that case, the minimum was just 2 years. And in that 2 years, we still pretty regularly spoke English in the classroom for just an hour a day. It wasn't until later when I took an optional 3rd and 4th year of French that we actually only spoke French for the entire hour. But once I left that class, I didn't really have any opportunity to continue speaking it. But on the flip side of things, foreign languages are seen as a primary component of primary education here in Germany. For example, after West Germany and France signed a treaty on Franco-German cooperation in 1963, secondary schools started offering French-German bilingual sections. Now, Germany has over 600 schools that offer some form of bilingual education, with 150 of those at the primary level. The third and final problem, which I put that in quotations because it comes from a place of incredible privilege, but the last issue is that Americans have the privilege of English as a first language. Today, English is truly a global lingua franca, the language most widely spoken throughout the world, and Americans benefit from it greatly. The vast majority of Americans who visit Europe on a summer vacation likely only know a handful of words at best of the countries they visit, because it's relatively easy to function in a foreign country here relying only on English. You can probably check into a hotel in Europe speaking only English. And at most major airports, train stations, and city centers, signage will include both the native language and English. But Germans visiting the US would be hard-pressed to find the same level of accommodation auf Deutsch.
Coca-Cola for les infants.
2 champagnes américains.
Yeah. And, votre meilleur vin.
Je vais vous apporter de l'eau de vaisselle. Ne sentirez pas la différence.
But what I also think is wildly fascinating is that statistically speaking, the majority of English speakers around the globe are not native English speakers. Of the approximately 1.5 billion people who speak English, less than 400 million use it as a first language. That means that over 1 billion people speak it as a secondary language. And again, this is why English is kind of catapulted to becoming the global de facto language in modern times. English is the international language of business, commerce, science, medicine, and many other key areas. Even in diplomacy, where French once ruled as supreme, English is now dominant in most regions of the world. And English is the global standard for air traffic control. And more multinational companies are mandating English as the common corporate language, all in an attempt to facilitate communication and performance across geographically diverse functions and business endeavors. And at the end of the day, language is how we connect with the world. It's how we communicate. It's how we pass on linguistic heritage. And I, for one, am pretty excited to see where my language learning takes me. But as my final question to you in the comment section of this video, I would love to hear, what languages do you speak? I think it would be fascinating to sort of have a little poll going down in the comment section just to see how many of the viewers of our videos not only speak multiple foreign languages, but how many languages do you speak? And curiously, if English is not your first language, is one of the reasons you watch our videos simply to learn English? I've heard that at least a couple of times, but I'd like to get a more broad consensus on that because I think that's super fascinating. So as always, guys, please let me know down in the comment section below what you think. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from the Black Forest family, hit that subscribe button. So until next time, cheers!